Vue has this concept of modifiers, which do some extra tasks when some event occurs or a particular kind of event like a mouse event, click event occurs, etc. Uh, and also on the V model, there are some modifiers. So let's look at what these modifiers are, what they do. Now, in this V model example, we had seen that we have to prevent the default action like this. We get the event object and we call event.prevent default, which is a standard JavaScript way to prevent the default handling for that event. Like browser would submit the form itself, it wouldn't do now. Now, Vue, since it's a very common thing we do in form submission, etc., in form submission especially, for these events, we like click or submit, we can actually give a prevent modifier like this. So if we say submit event we are handling, we can say dot prevent, and this is how you add a modifier event, that name, submit at submit, dot prevent. So what that would do is it would automatically prevent the form submission, the default event handler from the browser end. So you don't really need to get hold of the event object. So you can even remove this and remove this. You can remove this. So you don't need, I'll comment it out, let it be in place. So it will not submit the form through, the browser will not submit the form even now. We can check that. We can, yeah, the form is here. And Jonathan, whatever, password. Check the console, it will log it on submit. The important part is it did not refresh the page. The browser did not submit the form, right? So your default, your usual task of preventing the event handling from the browser end, that's done automatically through this modifier. Now, you may also want to, let's say, validate the password. So what you could do is you can create a validate password method. Validate password. We're not going to write a full-fledged validation logic, but what we do here is we will get hold of the password value, this dot password, and we'll test that it obeys some criteria. For example, we will write a regular expression. So A to Z. So regular expressions, if you are not aware, they use a string matching, whether to test if a string like a password value matches it or it satisfies certain criteria, like it should have an uppercase or whatever. So this is a regular expression which indicates that there is at least one uppercase in the string. So you say regular expression dot test this string, which string, the credentials. So basically it'll search for an occurrence of at least one uppercase character. A to Z is the range. You give a range in square brackets in regular expression, and this is how you delimit. You create a regular expression, slashes, just like strings you quoted. So you're testing this. If it satisfies at least one uppercase, it will actually be true. This test function will return, method will return true. So if it does not return true, so I'll use a not. Okay, this is just a negation. If you want to be more clear, you can say if it returns false, that means it does not have even one uppercase, and we will alert, or we'll set a message here probably. We'll have a data member called message. Error or error password. Errors we'll say, and we'll actually create a password, right? So, and we'll say yes, initially no error, so empty string, and here we will set the this dot errors dot password. So there should be at least one uppercase letter. So similarly, of course, you could do other tests just like this test and set the error message. I'm not doing that. Like one lowercase, one special character, 8 characters long, whatever. And we'll also return immediately since there's an error, we'll return. So we'll not do any further processing, or explicitly you can return false, let's say. So other checks can similarly be set up. Of course, there are various ways you can set up this check. Through a single regular expression also you can detect whether there is a single, at least one lowercase, one uppercase, etc. So we could write other checks. And finally, if they would have also returned. So it's not returned so far, it means it has obeyed everything and there are no errors. So we'll return true, no errors. So all good in this case. So we'll call validate password when the submission occurs. That is, we call the login, right, when submission occurs. So before we log, we will actually, log here, we'll actually test it out. So if validate password, it'll return true if everything is good. Only then we'll do this. And by the way, one more thing I forgot. If password errors.password is set up already, that should be cleared if it's valid. So before we return true, we will actually set up errors.password. Not password to empty, indicating that there's no error. So, so one thing, we'll validate the password. So if it's good, we will log it. Else we'll say there are errors. Check and correct errors. Yes, the way we have set up, only one message will be set up, one error message. So there could be multiple failures in the password, one uppercase, one at least one lowercase, it's not there. So, but the way we are setting up is the first check that fails, we set up the error according to that and then stop the validation. So if validate password return true, then we'll log the credentials. All good also will say. All good. Okay. Else we would be seeing this. Check the password. Yes. So we'll also display the error. So right below this div, we'll actually display credentials dot error right below the password div. Or maybe even put it in a div. And so there is, of course, a better way to display this in Bootstrap. They have error handling kind of classes, etc. Not using that, that's fine. So text danger, which sets up a red color on this div. So refresh, Jonathan, and I'm typing out all lowercase password, and we need at least one uppercase. Now when I try to log in, validate password is not defined. Okay, there's a mistake here. It should be this dot validate password, right? You're calling a method, another method, from this method login. So everything should be this dot. We are calling it from the template, there is no this, but here you need to use the context. Try again. Jonathan, password all lowercase PSSWRD login. And you can see it says all good. Oh, it says actually all good. There's something wrong here. Let's check the test here. So we are saying uppercase dot test credentials. If it's actually false, dot test credentials, if it's false, let's actually check whether this regular expression is right. It's all lowercase, it should have given an error. So when you give lowercase password, it is false. It's not obeying. So there's some other mistake. So it is false. So we set the password and we return false. Here when we're checking it, if this dot validate password, uh, so it should have returned false actually, but it actually went into this. I made actually a mistake here. We are checking the regular expression against the object, credentials object. That's not right, right? Checking against this. We actually have to just check against credentials dot password. This is the password input. So it should actually be this dot credentials dot password here. Now it should work. Let's refresh, keep the console open. So type in Jonathan, password, login. Okay, actually set up a breakpoint. Remove that. Okay, console. And yes, we see check the password and correct the error. Right. Let me show again. Clear this, login, and you can see it. Right. So we want to show this password here. So again, there also I have set up this dot credentials, credentials dot error. It should be actually credentials dot errors dot password. That's also a mistake. That's why we have set it up, right? This dot errors dot sorry, this dot errors dot password, not credentials. This dot errors dot password. So here it should be just errors dot password. No, this, right? Yeah. Let's see that. Password all lowercase PSS WRD login, and you see there should be at least one uppercase letter. Of course, we could have it right below this input. Maybe we just need to change. We just need to change this from here to, yeah. Let's see again. Jonathan, password all lowercase password. Yeah, we see it here. Of course, again, we could move it here. We just need to set it up on the right place. So it'll be right within this span actually. Okay, just some moving around of the HTML elements. Yeah, that looks much better. There should be at least one uppercase letter. So we do see that, but if you give the right password, like one uppercase P caps I've given now, log in and you see it's printing all the user input. All right. So the point here is we might we might want to also do this validation, like let's say call validate password when we hit the enter key, let's say. So there's a modifier which says that, okay, when you hit the enter key up event is when you type a key. So when you press a key and it's released, let's say in this input, you press a key and it's released, you want to do validation then. So key up is the event. So we'll also handle the key up event on this and we'll validate it. So we'll call validate password method directly from there. Okay. So it will do the validation and it'll set up the error, etc. So sorry, I actually set it up on the username by mistake. It should be on the password. Okay, validate password. Now it would work. Like Jonathan, let me refresh Jonathan. And now I'm typing. I actually came into it and maybe that time also it fires. But if I type till there is some uppercase like P caps, I'll put. Now you see it's I put a capital P actually. So it validates on every key up. But let's say our requirement is different. We want to validate when you hit the enter key. Sometimes you do validation when you hit enter. So not like when you're typing every time. So what you can do is there is in JavaScript, the event object has a key code or key property. We'll see what it is. So we'll actually, so this will get called, it'll get the event object by the way. So you get the event object, if you don't pass any arguments, that's a default argument it gets. So we can do this only, first of all, let's log the event object and check just for understanding what information is there in it. So I will refresh and type something here, P caps ASS, and you can see the keyboard event for the key up event that occurred, keyboard event object. And that has a key code, which is a number, and something more useful, which is exactly the key. Now, if I hit enter now, you can see that the key, not the key code, that's a number always, the ASCII value. Key is enter. That's more useful and more readable. So we can check that if the event dot key is enter, only then we do the validation. Only then we do the validation. So we'll do all this only in that case. Otherwise, we'll not do the validation. We'll set the password to empty only, or yeah, or like we'll put this inside. We'll consider it valid. Okay. So now it would work. I'll type password PASSW. You can see it's not doing validation. I typed all lowercase. You're seeing it PASS, all lowercase. But yes, it's not validated. But now when I hit enter, you can see it validated. Right. So basically, the form is also submitted. It did not pass an event object. So if the event object exists, or it doesn't exist, or doesn't exist. So when you're calling it here directly, you're not passing any, so it'll be undefined. So the event object doesn't exist, or so the you called it on submit, or it exists like on enter key up event, and so you'll not get this error. That's all. So let's say enter. So basically, it's not showing the error, right? Or rather, it will show. But that's because the submit event also occurs. When you hit enter, the submit event also occurs. Okay. So for some particular key, you want to do the validation. That's it. Okay. Let's say you don't do it. You don't do the validation here. Let's say you don't do the validation when you submit actually. So you don't do the validation here. I'll comment this out. So you do it. So you don't do the validation actually in my mind. Let's say instead of this, you just log the credentials, maybe all good credentials. So you don't really test it out during login. You assume that all the checks have been done. So type out password with all lowercase. I actually type capital P, I changed it. Enter. So you see the error coming up, right? So only when you hit enter, you want to do the validation. Right now, you are doing it on every key press. But this is the code that you're doing to filter out and only validate, do the validation, run this validation logic if the enter key is pressed. Now, Vue.js actually gives you one more modifier for this. When an key up event occurs, you can actually give a modifier which key you want to run that method on. Not all keys, but only when it's the enter key. How you do that is in this key up, you can say dot, and where the key like for enter key, you can say like this, dot enter. So now this runs only when you press the key, which is the enter key. You don't need to do this, the key check. So you can actually comment this out and it will still work the same way. Okay. So let's see that. So I'll type something like lowercase password, PA. You can see there's no validation happening now. But when I hit enter, password enter, then it does the validation. So only on the enter key does the method run, right? So that reduces this effort, and people might not have remember how to do this, so they have to check it. You don't need to do that all. You have this modifier only when the enter key is pressed, not any key, but the enter key is pressed. Will you validate, run this function? So like this, there are lots of modifiers in Vue. One more useful modifier, very often used modifier, is the trim modifiers. This exists on the model, V model attribute. It's not on any in that handler setup, but on the V model. Many times what we want to do when we take user input, we actually want to trim out the spaces. Like right now, whatever happened, leading and trailing spaces won't be trimmed. For example, username will never have spaces in the beginning or the end. A person might actually give spaces, Jonathan spaces, by mistake, let's say, give like this. There are spaces at the trailing spaces and leading spaces in the beginning. So when you actually log in, this is what is stored in the V model, the entire thing with the spaces, right? So in the credentials dot username and password. So you can see it has those spaces. Normally, when you want to send it, you will trim the spaces. That's a good practice. Also, when you do validations, you will trim the spaces and then check whether it's a valid password. Otherwise, you will get a false positive, like or whatever, saying that okay, this is not valid. This is valid, whereas it's not actually valid. It'll be just spaces. Right? You'll be just having spaces here, and you can see it's not an empty string, but it should not be considered valid. It should be invalid. So what you can do is you can set up the trim modifier on the v model. So let's try that out. Dot trim. So what this will do is when it stores the v model through the v model setup, right? It will store it in the data when the user types, when the user modifies the input value. At that time, it will trim the leading and trailing spaces, spaces at the beginning and spaces at the end. Now with this change, vmodel.trim for both username and password. Let me show for the username. I'll just give space, 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 Jonathan, space, space, space. So login, and now you can see it has trimmed those spaces. Although we have given it here, it doesn't have. In fact, when we log in, so actually when space, 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 Jonathan. So when we log in, right, you can see those spaces removed as well. Useful feature, right? So this way we can use trim, and while storing it in the data, it actually trims it. Okay. So these are useful modifiers. You can find more modifiers in the event handling section in Vue.js documentation. You can find it here. Vue.js event handling. And you can find event modifiers, key modifiers, mouse button modifiers. You have many more. And you can even find the form input bindings. There's more modifiers here. Trim, number is also there. So when you type in some thing in the text box, it's always a string. Value is always a string, even if it represents a number like quantity 100 or something. It will be stored as a string, double quoted 100. So if you want, you can use number and like number, age, storing somebody's age. It will convert to a number data type internally and store it. And you can explore these modifiers.